being approached or talked to by the cops. So when I was alone and I could do that in order to sort of keep myself centered, and it helped immensely to have friends there too who were singing the traditional Good Friday hymn as well, and so that helped with the spiritual tone of the witness.
So how would you transition your action and the actions of others within your community to sort of the everyday life? I mean, I as a child heard the story of my grandparents who never turned anybody who knocked away at the back door. They never turned anybody away from the back door without a piece of bread, a loaf of bread, something. And so, that's how I would relate to your efforts in action. How would you suggest that, say, taking 3 or 4 minutes, that today's Catholic could respond in such a way?
Well, there's always a lot of controversy about what it means to be a real Catholic, and people argue about that, and it becomes a little bit of a debating society, which is a little unfortunate because I think the Catholic tradition is broad enough and deep enough to give us lots of resources. I mean, one of the primary things that the Catholic worker has emphasized since its inception has been the works of mercy. And the beauty of the works of mercy is that anyone can do them. You don't have to be a priest, you don't have to be a religious, you don't even have to be a card-carrying Catholic, after all is said and done, to know what your grandparents knew, which was someone knocks on your door and says they're hungry. Part of being human and part of being compassionate is to help them meet that need, meet that need for something in their stomach. And, the works of mercy are both corporal and spiritual. I like to think of this action as a spiritual work of mercy, as a kind of, instruction of the ignorant and a rebuke to the wrongdoers. And I feel like it's a continuum with what I've done at other times in my adult life, which is to live in a Catholic worker house and provide hospitality to homeless families who would live under the same roof with us and share meals with them.
What do you see as today's issues for Catholics?
Well, again, I think that's been unfortunately highly politicized, You could see a polarization between people who would call themselves conservative Catholics, and they would put a lot of emphasis on abortion as an issue and a problem. And on the other hand, you could talk to people who call themselves liberal Catholics, and they might emphasize a whole different set of issues: war, fighting war, again, contesting war, fighting poverty, and things along those lines. And then these people would, at the same time, not appreciate each other's emphasis. And
do you believe those are the voting issues for Catholics?
I think people make them their voting issues, and I think when we do that, in some ways we shortchange the power and depth of the Catholic tradition. I think we have the capacity. I like to think of myself as a full spectrum Catholic because I can appreciate the traditional piety that people who would call themselves conservative emphasize, and I am in fact have great issues with abortion and think that we have to do a lot in our society to come up with some better choices than abortion for people.
What do you think about birth control?
Excuse me?
Birth control.
These days I practice birth control the old-fashioned way. I don't get involved with anyone. But I think that's an issue that gets I think sometimes we get into an issue like that and preoccupy ourselves from looking at the deeper, more structural issues of social injustice. I think we can.
And so so if you were going to list 5, you know, the top 5 issues, what would you say, you know, in 1 or 2 words, the top 5 issues are?
Well, I think it's clear to me, for example, that we have a nuclear arsenal with which we can destroy the world. And that's an enormous threat. And it's an enormous violation of God's sovereignty over the world. So that occurs to me as almost the paramount issue, and it gets no attention and no discussion these days. You know, I think war scandalizes God, discredits Christianity, and again is destructive for the world and needs to be taken quite seriously. We need to understand that we can't change a problem like abortion unless we lift people out of poverty, and unless we learn that we can't be bigoted against whole classes of people on the basis of their race or their religion or where they come from in the world. If we're antagonistic toward people and we tell them we don't think they're worth much, they're not going to think that it's worth their while to have their children rather than end those pregnancies. So we need to really insist on the fullness of human dignity is what the Catholic Church talks about in its broadest sense.
If someone
not
was
just a single issue, but that's the underlying foundation for the issues I care about.
If someone was interested, what are 2 authors that you believe that they might want to read that would, in a sense, maybe elaborate on your philosophy or provide a philosophy that you think is valuable?